Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? I'm with. I wanted to start the conversation by calling Stanley Drucker a legend, but then I realized the last two people we had on, Michelle Zukovsky at 77 years old with a 54-year career, referred to Stanley Drucker as her mentor and hero, and Frank Cohen, who I also considered a legend at the age of almost 74, said one of his first fond clarinet memories was going backstage and getting this man's autograph. So he goes into a separate category of super legend. Thank you so much, Stanley, for being here. Welcome. Everyone's been looking forward to this.
Thank you very much, Andy. It's lovely to be with you.
Thank you. So I just want to say a few words. First of all, if anyone can see my t-shirt, if anyone likes jazz bass clarinet, this is Eric Dolphy, whose birthday it is today. And I just want to talk about Stanley for a minute. By the way, 20 years ago, he offered me to call him Stanley, and I refused. He was always going to be Mr. Drucker to me, but we've made a deal that this time I'm going to call him Stanley, and I'm a bit nervous about it, so let's see how it works out. But I just want to say what I could dig up on him and what I remembered is, first of all, he's in the Guinness Book of Records for the longest clarinet career, 60 years. Also, there's only 3 members in the history of the New York Philharmonic honorary members of the New York Philharmonic Society honorary members. One is Zubin Mehta, the other is Emanuel Ax, and the third is this man here, Stanley Drucker. I believe he's also the first orchestral player to be named Musical America's Instrumentalist of the Year, and he was ABC Network TV's Person of the Week. He has his own published biography with a foreword written by the Academy Award winner John Corigliano, famous composer. He has an honorary doctorate from the University of Florida. He's in the Long Island Music Hall of Fame. Any other world records you own, Stanley, or have I covered it pretty good?
Well, I think you probably made it sound better than it is.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I can't predict the future, but I think you're going to make it one day. Keep it up. Keep up the good work. So anyway, I also want to say, usually I talk about how I know the guests, and Stanley's been very nervous because we first met 40 years ago for the first time I auditioned for the Juilliard School. He was on the committee, and that was the year I did not get in. But I've been working hard with my psychologist, and I've forgiven you after 40 years, Stanley, so don't worry. I know that you were very nervous about that. I got in later, don't worry. So what I want to do is I want to talk to you about the Guinness record, okay? Because usually people set up an event, or there's a record to break, or they'll say, we're going to try to break this record. Do you actually know that you were going to break the record, or did someone comment, oh, we think you've broken the record already, let's give them a call? How did that all happen?
Well, most of that came out of the blue. At the final solo performance that I gave with the Philharmonic, it was the Copland Concerto with Lauren Mazel conducting. And at the intermission of the concert, the certain dignitaries came out on stage, chairman of the board of the New York Philharmonic, these people from the Guinness Book, and other Philharmonic officials came out and started to speak about my career, and they played. They had a film that they had compiled with various clips of things I've done over the years, which was all of this was a complete surprise to me. And there were 2 folks there that were from the Guinness Book, and they presented me with this plaque that I guess that they send out, and to the various people that are given that, and I thought it was kind of funny because it even mentioned the years, days, and minutes, that kind of thing.
Wow.
It's it takes a lot to take that in. Anyway, that was one of the things, and with this film, which was really amazing, how it with tributes from colleagues and conductors and so forth, and then came the board chairman speaking about giving, I had been given the honor of being an honorary member of the society, and of course that there are very few people that were named over the years. It started in 1843, I believe, the year after the Philharmonic started, in 1842, and some of the early ones were famous composers and people in the arts, some statesmen, various dignitaries, and a lot of composers. I mean, many composers, Stravinsky and Tchaikovsky and Leonard Bernstein and so forth. And so I would say at this time, maybe there are 65 to 70 members of honorary members of the society. It's a big honor. I was practically in tears. I never expected anything like that. It was a very moving moment. Of all that went on, that probably was the most for me, because it meant your name was in every program, things like that. Wow. And it was I'd say most of the events that took place at that time I never knew about. They were all planned. Maybe they were planned a year in advance. I don't know.
Oh. It's interesting because I obviously got it wrong on the website, the New York Philharmonic website. They only named 3 people.
Yes. They named 3 people because that's the people that are still alive. Oh. Wow. But if you go online, you can get the complete list.
Wow.
And in fact, I might have a complete list right here. So I used to have one in here. Well, I guess
I'm sure we can find it online.
You can find it online, and you can see, people like Saint-Saëns and Anton Rubinstein and Schubert, very famous.
We chatted towards the end of your tenure with the New York Phil, and I remember, and I can't remember exactly what the record was, but you were talking about, was it a principal timpanist in the Met? Is that for the longest principal in a major orchestra in America?
I would say so. Yes. I remember reading his story in one of the music magazines.
Wow. So you're one of the two. You're one of the two longest-serving principals of a major orchestra.
Well, the fortunate thing is that if you start young enough, you can sort of have a long story.
Yeah. Well. Yes, that's true. But not everyone's playing the Copland Concerto at over 80 with Lauren Moselle.
That was a. I think I played that concerto about 65 times over the years with various conductors. So,
yeah. Did you play with Copland? Did you ever play with Copland?
I played with Copland, but not his concerto. Oh. He conducted at a promenade concert where I did the Weber concertina with Copland conducting. Oh. But I did do the concerto with a number of different conductors, and on many tours also. The interesting thing is that when Leonard Bernstein came the last time, as nobody knew it was going to be the last time, at the Philharmonic, it was I believe it was in 1989 in the fall, and it was an all Copland program and I was his last soloist, as it turned out.
Wow.
And I did play with him once more before he passed away. And that was in Berlin for the Freedom Concert, the Freedom Concerts, which were done in Christmas 1989, where he conducted the Beethoven Ninth Symphony. We did on the 23rd of December. We played it in West Berlin, and on Christmas morning, from East Germany, the Schauspielhaus, this famous hall that was restored in the East, and we played it at 11 a.m. local time, and that was heard all over the world. That
Sure.
performance,
Yeah.
where he changed the Goethe's words, from joy to freedom,
Right.
from Freude to Freiheit, when the chorus sang.
Right. Well, I actually saw that concert televised, and I'm sure someone can correct me, but my memory is that they interviewed Bernstein just before it, and he mentioned that there were players from all around the world, but the only person that I remember, maybe it's because it's you, but the only person I remember him mentioning by name was you. He actually said, he had a word like fantastic or brilliant. Principal clarinetist is Stanley Drucker from New York Philharmonic. I remember him specifically mentioning that in his interview.
Well, you're not going to give me a swell head, but
oh, I know. This is the first time you've ever gotten compliments, I'm sure.
That was an interesting time, because the nucleus orchestra was the Bavarian Radio Orchestra, and in addition, he invited musicians from various other orchestras. I believe there were two from the London Symphony, a flute and an oboe. There were some from the Leningrad Orchestra, some string players, I believe, and other orchestras around the world. The Israel Philharmonic was one, and to fill out this orchestra, and it was an exciting time, because it was the two performances and the actual live performance from East Berlin was very exciting. The wall was coming down. It was down in places, and you heard banging away at the wall, all the time. It was very, very moving kind of time to be in Berlin at that time.
Did you have a lot of rehearsal time? Like, what was it like blending with all these people from all these different schools and in pitch levels?
The rehearsals were in Munich at the Bavarian Radio Orchestra's home, and we had rehearsals during the week. The four vocal soloists were international, of course. Judith, I forget her name. The soprano was I think her name was Anderson, and she and other colleagues, from different places, were the four soloists, and some of them had been in London the week prior, or a couple of weeks prior, recording Candide, and Lenny was, of course, with them in conducting, and they all came over to do this Freedom Concert, and it was a very exciting time. The European players were excellent, it was fun to sit with players with played different type of instruments and different styles. But it was, I'm glad there's a video of it so one can get to see. And
do you remember who was playing clarinet with you?
Yes, it was Brunner. His name was Brunner.
Eddie Brunner.
Edward Brunner. He was I guess at that time he was in the Bavarian Radio Orchestra. He's an interesting player because he didn't play the German system. He played the Boehm system, and it looked like kind of an old buffet. I didn't peer too closely, but it looked like it, and So he was one of the few players I thought that played the French system at that, in Germany at that time, because all of the famous players played, the German system.
Stanley, as you know, a million years ago, there was a little tribute to Bernstein at a concert at the New York Philharmonic. They had a little chat before, and I was fortunate enough to attend it, and I was completely blown away. You pulled out a kind of a wrinkled piece of paper and said that Bernstein was so moved by the whole event that he had written a poem about it and handed it to you as a gift. Isn't that right?
Oh, well, what he did, he sent a copy to his New York Philharmonic colleagues that went to Berlin. Wow. Would you like to hear it?
Yo, please.
Well, okay. He said, we had a little party that our board, our Philharmonic board chairman gave in West Berlin after on the 24th of December, on a free night, because we played in West Berlin on the 23rd, and on the 24th, the Bavarians went home to wherever their homes were for Christmas Eve. And then we came back to play the concert on Christmas morning from East Berlin. Everything was close. I think it was a 5-minute drive from the hall in West Berlin and to the hall, this Schauspielhaus, because it was a checkpoint you went right through at that point. And anyway, he came out. Lenny came out at this little party that our chairman gave. We were a group of about 6 or 7. Cellist, a horn player, violinists, an oboe, me, and a few other, So anyway, he said he couldn't sleep the night before, so he wrote these words about it. And it says, Christmas in Berlin, 89. The weather here is far too warm. Kris Kringle sweats and frets in his woolly cap and beard. No hint of snow or 0 temperature disturbs the gray, wet gravity of air. And yet the nose and toes are all a tingle. The atmosphere of faith is new and weird. Fresh gestures of embrace are young and pure, fumbling with their freedom here and there. What was the here and there now safely mingled? One is allowed to kiss what once one feared. The kiss may still be lightly insecure, a brush of lip to cheek to brow or hair. But suddenly, the weather's cold and fair. The Christian bells for once seem to endure, as if to say, at last he has appeared, and what was walled apart is whole and single. LB, 24 December 1989. And then in his handwriting, he said, to all my dear New York Phil Berlin colleagues, with love, LB, happy 90s.
Wow. Wow, thanks so much for reading that. I mean, this is a little chunk of history right here. So this is fantastic. Wow, thanks, Stanley. Before we go on, I've always heard a few stories about you through the decades, and every time I see you, I get very tongue-tied and I forget to ask you. So I think they're interesting stories, or funny little tidbits. And we have a rule on this show: don't ruin a good story with the facts. Okay, so if it's not true, I'm only kidding. But I remember there was an oboist about 35 years ago who said he was in a woodwind quintet with your wife Naomi, who's also a very fine clarinet player. And they were doing some sort of wedding job or something, playing at a reception one afternoon. And he shows up, and instead of Naomi, you show up because she was sick or something happened. She couldn't find a sub. And the legend goes that while you guys were playing in the tent or something for background music, you caught the eye of this little old lady who came over and very patiently let you finish whatever tune you were playing, and walked right up to you and said, "Young man, has anyone ever told you you look just like Stanley Drucker in the New York Philharmonic?" And you looked in the eye and said, "No."
I do remember that it was a wedding that was held outdoor
He does remember that.
in some estate on eastern Long Island. I do remember that.
No, yeah, I have a very good sense of humor, I must say. I grew up next to a high school classmate of yours at Music and Art. His name was Marty Barr, and his daughter is trying to get him online to watch with another classmate of yours from high school called Dick Silver. And the story you remember, great. So
I know, because he came to the Philharmonic very often.
Right. So anyway, the legend that I heard was when you were in Music and Art, you weren't allowed to do outside jobs. That was the policy of the school. But being a prodigiously talented and slightly brash young man, you came into the rehearsal, in the school rehearsal in the morning, and they started playing Capriccio Espagnol, and the high school teacher stopped, and he says, "First clarinet, it shouldn't go this way, it should go this way." And you said something like, "Well, that's very interesting because I played it with Stokowski in Carnegie Hall last night, and he liked it the way I was playing."
Well, that's certainly a legendary comment, but I that's specific words. It's possible.
We'll take it. Well, and on a more serious note, because there's so many great things about having you here, but for me, my biggest sort of purpose on this kind of thing is to connect us with the past. Okay, and no one's better suited as a Guinness Book record holder than you. I remember as a young kid hearing shortly after World War II, Herbert von Karajan came to conduct the New York Phil, and of course he was an official member of the Nazi Party, and that the orchestra walked off in a rehearsal. Is that true?
Well, as I remember it at this point, he came for a 2-week stint as a guest conductor. At that time, it was I guess it was well, you would know the year. Anyway, it was to be he did Strauss at one program, I think, in Beethoven at the other, and he came out on stage for the first rehearsal, and it was complete silence. No comments, no applause, nothing. And he came up on stage, he closed his eyes and started to conduct, and never opened them for the whole rehearsal. He did a lot of conducting with closed eyes.
Huh. Okay, so maybe the legend that I heard wasn't that accurate.
Well, it's very possible that there were maybe they had internal meetings about it. Maybe some of the players. I'm not sure. I was, being luckily being quite young, I was sort of not involved too much with the politics of what was going on, as others might be,
Just out of curiosity, was there something special about the 2 weeks on a musical level, something that was different from a lot of the other legends that you had worked with?
Well, he was very professional. I thought, very smooth. It was there was nothing out of place. He had a very cool approach, and very sure approach. But we've had many conductors of all stripe, over the years. We're very lucky in New York that way. You get the best, or at least what the world says is the best, coming through there. And even and think of all guest conductors that were through there that were also very excellent. I did play with 10 music directors in my time at the Phil. Well, actually, the 10th was he wasn't music director when he came. It was years after. It was John Barbaroli, who had come into become director right after Toscanini in the 30s.
Wow! Did you ever work with Toscanini?
Never. He never conducted the Philharmonic in my years. When he did the NBC orchestra, of course, all those years. All those concerts on the radio, and no, but never conducted. I never played under his.
Did you ever go to a concert that he conducted?
Yes, I did. I heard a couple of concerts. Of course, he was the most famous one of his era.
And did you ever talk with some of the musicians about it? What it was like working with him?
Well, there was a group that thought there was nobody else that could get up on a podium and conduct. They were sort of hardcore fans of his, and others thought that he was, he was a little bit too muscular, in his approach.
Wow. Well, now, how long have you been retired? 11 years, 12 years?
11 years.
Right. So what have you been doing for the last 11 years? And has it changed? What you've been doing the last year or two, is it different than what you've been doing the first year or two?
Well, I'm using less reeds. and most of them seem to work. That's the big takeaway. I'd say I've done a few things over time, concerts, recitals type things, and I even did played in a concert this past winter.
Wow.
With the Philharmonic group at the Jazz from Lincoln Center auditorium at part of Lincoln Center.
Yeah.
And it was a piece for 7 instruments and mezzo soprano by Luciano Berio, called Folk Songs, a piece he wrote in the mid-60s. And they called me. They said, we'd like you to join us for this. And I said, great. I guess I was surprised, but the one thing it did for me was put me into the 7th decade.
Right. And whether that's another record or something.
So it was lovely to play it and to be there with colleagues. And as a matter of fact, I was in the middle of 2 rehearsals to 4 rehearsals, and then everything closed down, as the whole world closed down. With the Woodwind Quintet, a colleague of mine from the Philharmonic was in it, plus other New York players, and it was to be, the Mozart 4 Winds and piano, the Beethoven trio, a piece by Croussel for clarinet, horn, and bassoon, and which I didn't know. It was a new piece to me, very much of Croussel style. And I think there was another piece on that program. We had 2 rehearsals, and we were to play it in Manhattan, in New York, and of course everything closed, so we didn't play it, and it's keeps getting pushed forward.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in the world are
feeling. But I played a couple of concerts with the senior orchestra in Carnegie Hall with people I'd worked with and knew over the years, and colleagues from the Philharmonic. So that was fun to play in Carnegie again, because I started out there with the Philharmonic. My first 12 years were in Carnegie. There was no Lincoln Center.
Are you practicing every day? I mean, are you?
I play. Yeah, well, I would say I play almost every day, but not every day.
Wow. Amazing. I must say, there's some master classes. There's some videos now on YouTube of master classes you've done, I guess, in your retirement, and I really like it. And you know, once in a while I refer my students to them, and I always start the conversation with, we know one thing about it: no one has more experience than this man ever. Okay, so I mean, what you're saying about especially these orchestral excerpts, I mean, no one has played them more than you. So it's pretty good authority.
That's a study in itself.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. What I'd like to ask you is, now let's work right from the beginning. Okay, so who are you? Like I said, I love to shout out a little bit to the old legends, the teachers, everyone else. So who was your first teacher? How did that all happen? Your first job, everything like that.
Well, you know, I guess everybody has read Mitch Estrin's book. It's very, very complete, you know, as to a lot of things. And I would say that I was given a clarinet at the age of 10, and I guess my sister, who was a little bit older than I was, she was, you know, a teenager, and they called the musicians union, wanted a recommendation for a teacher, and they recommended somebody who was a very lovely man who would come over to our apartment in Brooklyn to give the lesson. And he was a doubler. He played clarinet, sax, and probably flute. And he'd come once a week, and of course I didn't want to really practice. I was yeah, because at that age you want to go out and play, you know, ball or something. Brooklyn was a great sports town, and you wanted to play, like, you know, like your heroes on the Dodgers or something like that. But this fellow was pretty good. You know, he had I would say a feeling for music, and not knowing anything, because whatever he said, I did. He said, you know, you stick it in your mouth and blow. You know, you didn't analyze, and you didn't agonize. If kid, that's the good part of being a kid. They say do it, and you do it. So anyway, he was there for a good number of months, but then went on the road with the band and never came back to us in Brooklyn. So maybe I scared him away. I don't know. But there was a mom and pop music store in my neighborhood in Brooklyn that where I'd go to there to buy 2 or 3 reeds and stuff like that. And they said we needed a teacher, and he recommended Rushinoff, who was living still with his parents, not far. And his father was a dentist, and anyway, he started to teach, you know, me. I went to his studio. He had a studio, of course, by this point. First, it was in his house, in his parents' apartment, but then soon after, I guess he got the New York studio. He had, in that building in New York, he had 2 locations over the years. He was on the 4th floor for part of it, on the 3rd floor for part of it. It was a 4-story building, very out of place today. I think there's a monster building there in its place now. It was Broadway, corner of 48th Street. So that's where I guess a lot of talented players were already there, you know, working with this man. He was was an interesting guy. He was, it's like one would say, he was a real Woody Allen, you know. I mean, he had a great sense of humor, but he was a serious guy, very deep. In those days, you said, oh, he's very deep. You know, you don't use that term anymore, I don't think. But he was very much an adult, but with a lot of fun. And he never, and he'd criticize, mind you. It's not that he avoided anything. He could be very critical, but he knew how to draw out of somebody something, and he could get the best that person had out. He had a great, you know, he had a real New York sense of humor, but he was serious, moody in a way. But I would say, to describe him in a word, he was very adult, and we were all kids.
Yeah, well, you know, I studied with him for 6 years myself, so I really appreciate the tribute. Right. In fact, I'd like to mention this is the 30th anniversary year of his death. So
right.
It's really great that you you know, paid that tribute. And I'd like to dig a little deeper into that. He always took pride in the fact that 5 couples met in his studio and got married. Okay.
Oh, he could have had a second career as a matchmaker.
Well, am I wrong in saying the first couple was you and your wife Naomi?
Sure. Yes, and that's true. And he was our best man at our ceremony.
Right. And then didn't you actually name your son after him?
Right. Our son is named for Leon.
Right. Leon. And isn't your son a punk rock musician?
Well, a rockabilly musician. It was a rockabilly trio called the Stray Cats. Very popular in the 80s. Just had a reunion tour before the pandemic. Half of the tour in Europe, half of it here, and very successful. And our daughter Roseanne also was she was a country singer, for trying to fight the battle of Nashville.
Huh. Wow. Wow. So okay, so Russianoff, you've told me before you really consider your main teacher.
Yes, well, you know, yes, but some lessons at the studio, at Russianoff studio, were given by Simon Kovar, the bassoonist.
Wow.
Who was an interesting character. He was in the Philharmonic for a long time. I think he was the second or third bassoon. And he taught in a vocal manner.
Wow. Didn't Daniel Bernard also have a studio as part of Leon's or next door or something like that? Yeah.
Next door.
Did you meet him? Do you know?
Yes, I did meet him.
Yeah. Did you ever take a lesson with him, or?
No. But I did study for a year with Bernard Portnoy at the Curtis.
Okay. So you went to Curtis at what age?
I entered the school, I was 15.
So what year are we talking about now? Because I want to start putting this in world perspective here.
1944.
Okay, so it was during World War II. Now you were at the Curtis Institute.
Right. I took the audition because it was a scholarship school. I was in the High School of Music and Art, and I was finished my second year, and I considered trying out for Juilliard, but you couldn't get in it unless you were a high school graduate. Where Curtis, they had kids 8 and 9 years old playing the fiddle.
Wow.
And only 100 students, and you didn't have to pay. It was free.
So you were 15. You only stayed 1 year there. Is that right?
I was ready to stay a long time, but I got a job.
Right. And that was where? Indianapolis?
Indianapolis. I took the audition at the Musicians Union in Philadelphia for the conductor, Fabian Savitsky. He was a nephew of Koussevitzky.
Oh.
He was a bass player, had been in the Philadelphia Orchestra, and he was already a conductor of the Indianapolis Symphony. And he was going around to various cities to fill out his roster of players for the orchestra. So I auditioned for him, and I got the job. And the funny thing is, I wasn't, you know, as a kid, you don't ponder too much. I went to the director of the school, Curtis, and asked advice what to do about whether to take this thing or not. And they said, you got to take it. You can always come back. I took it, never came back. I was one of the famous dropouts, but because some of my fellow students that were there 8 and 10 years, you know, and made careers. Some of them became faculty there, you know. Oh. Seymour Lipkin, yeah. Abba, you know, the people like that. Pianist, violinist, Aaron Roseanne, the violinist, was a great violinist. He was on the faculty afterwards, and so they were. We had a weekly broadcast that was on the radio that Tabuteau conducted, and it was a good experience because Tabuteau always said, when you get out into the real world, you'll find it's easier than here.
Really? And was he right? Was he right?
Well, I take it with a grain of salt, but he was a great teacher, no question. He had an idea about performance and sound.
So,
so I was there, and the season was a 22-week season. I remember there were no orchestra had long. You didn't have year-round orchestras then. Most of them were 20, 22 weeks. Even the New York Philharmonic was only 28 weeks. So you were unemployed for the other weeks. No unemployment insurance in those days, and salaries were low. But you learned, and you met the same people at auditions. So what you did, you went out auditioning to try to get a longer season or a couple of bucks more a week. And so you were always in the audition mode. It was very different in those days. There, you never knew what they were going to ask you to play in those years. Not like today where you can receive the music a month in advance, you know. You played what you wanted to play at the beginning, and then they put out the stuff they wanted to hear. And no tenure in those days. If the conductor didn't like you 2 weeks later after hiring you, you were out, you know, no protection. But it was a different kind of a world then, you know. But anyway, so the course of events for me I sort of was very focused, maybe withdrawn in a way, on playing the clarinet. No social graces or activity, you know. It was what I did. Mm-hmm. So I went from Indianapolis after auditioning. I toured with Adolf Busch, who had a chamber orchestra. Now, mind you, some of the people in that and in Indianapolis, I played with in other orchestras also. Everybody moved around. And it was a conductorless orchestra, the Adolf Busch. He was the violinist. He sat in the first chair and started things off. He had a famous string quartet, the Busch Quartet. And they made a great recording with Reginald Kell in 1937 of the Brahms Quintet. This classic recording. Yep. I mean, it's an amazing recording. And so he was a father figure, and so I played there. It was a tour. It was an 8-week tour, but it paid more than the 22 weeks in Indianapolis. And while there, Busch, who was like he became my father practically. You know, he said you have to play for this person and that person, and one of those was William Steinberg, the great conductor. He was Toscanini's assistant for a while, and he was the director of the Buffalo Philharmonic. So I auditioned for him and I got the job, and I went up there. It was a good job. There were recordings that they made. Indianapolis made recordings also. So I think the first recording I made in Indianapolis was the first symphony of Tchaikovsky, The Winter Dreams, with Fabian Savitsky conducting. And in Buffalo, there was other works that we did. So interesting. One of my colleagues in Buffalo, first oboe, was Ray Still. Huh. It was his first professional job after getting out of the Army. His wife and he gave me an 18th birthday party in Buffalo. A lot of snow there, too much snow. But whilst there, as they say in England, the Philharmonic let me know that they were auditioning. And now I didn't know what chair it was auditioning for. It was clarinet audition.
Wait, sorry. Before we get there, a couple of questions. First of all, did you actually meet Reginald Kell?
Yes, I met him. I met him when he came to the U.S. I forget what year it was. I met him at a concert he was going to play with the Bush Quartet. He did the Brahms Quintet at that concert, and the concert was in Town Hall, in New York, which still is a venue. You know, it's on 43rd Street, I believe. And I met him at that point. Of course, he was the only clarinet player one heard on records in those days. And he recorded a lot of pieces, some crossover pieces. He did an album called Quiet Music, with sort of dreamy stuff, you know. He was very unique in his style. It was, I would say, the straight-laced players didn't care for his vibrato and so forth, but Beecham liked it, and others, you know, other conductors liked it. Wow. He was certainly an excellent musician, and so that's the player you heard. There was nobody else. Maybe you heard French recordings sometimes. Kawasaki made some early ones, and in England, of course, there was Charles Draper, who made some recordings at that period. But it spawned a whole group of wonderful players in England.
So you mentioned recordings in Indianapolis and Buffalo. What was it like recording during World War II? I mean, what technologically? I mean, what they just had a red light and you played when once and whatever happened, or what?
Well, they had whatever degree of expertise at that time, or the kind of equipment they had. You know, don't forget it was major companies, Columbia Records for one, and another big name label for another. So it was whatever at that point was very good. At the Philharmonic, of course, we also recorded at that time, and I made my first chamber music recording in the 50s of the Bartok contrasts, and that was unusual setting for it. It was in a high school on the east side of Manhattan, a girls' high school, Julia Richmond. And we recorded it on the floor in front of the stage, the one microphone for the three of us. Leonard Hambro was the pianist, and Robert Mann, the violinist. He was the leader of the Juilliard String Quartet. And the company was Bartok Records. It was the son of Bela Bartok, Peter Bartok. He wrote a book about his father. And it was, I'd say, pretty much it was one microphone It was practically a one taker, you know. And it was, I'd say, the sound on it was very good. I thought the sound of the instruments in that Bartok, and that was 1954, I believe.
Wow.
So you always were doing something. Now, after I got into the Phil, and that was also a situation where 3 of the 4 players were coming in that year. There were 3 openings. You know, I guess I was pretty isolated in Buffalo, not knowing what was going on anywhere, and I probably wouldn't have paid attention anyway. When you're a kid, you don't listen to that kind of stuff. You know, you say do it and you do it. But they were Bellison and Conrad, the second, Otto Conrad, the second clarinet, both retired that year. Bellison had been there since 1920, I guess, and Conrad had been there, less time, maybe 8 years less than Bellison. Also played German system like Bellison. Huh. At a reed factory in New Jersey, the Conrad Reed, the 2 of them retired. And the assistant, an E-flat, Alex Williams, whose stepfather was a clarinet player, Jan Williams, very well-known old-timer, you know. Mm-hmm. Alex Williams went to the NBC Orchestra's principal because McGuinness, who was an NBC at that point, came to the Philharmonic as principal. And Napoleon Germanara from Rome came in second, and I came in as assistant and E-flat. Luckiest thing that ever happened to me was that I came in on that chair, because I don't think there'd be much chance of promotion from the second chair. But
Stanley, how long were you the E-flat player of the
12 years.
Okay, so I mean, everyone knows you as the principal.
Yeah, well,
but I mean, you were really an E-flat player for a long time. What I'd like to ask you is, what recordings can we find of the New York Philharmonic with you playing the E-flat clarinet?
Right, some Shostakovich symphonies with Metropolis.
Okay.
And others before the next conductors came in. I'm on El Salon, Mexico.
Yes, that's a famous one.
And, some the Strauss poems, Zarathustra and Copland. There's some Copland music for the theater.
Wow, yeah, that's a doozy, yeah.
But different things like that. So it was I bought my E-flat clarinet from Alex Williams. It was a beautiful buffet with a great mouthpiece that he gave me with that. That was just perfect for it, because nobody has E-flat clarinet experience. Nobody studies the E-flat clarinet. Don't forget, every piece was new. For me, every piece was new, on clarinet or E-flat clarinet.
Right.
The gag always was they want somebody for that job that's 20 years old with 30 years of experience. The line they used.
Well, okay. So I mean, this is really interesting, but I want to rein it in.
I want to ask you, what are you drinking there? Is that vodka?
I've got to be on my A game. I'm talking to Stanley Drucker. Are you kidding me?
Okay, checking. It's clear.
Sparkling water. If I burp, you know what?
Sparkle.
So I want to take it step by step.
Sure.
So who hired you? Who was the music director who hired you?
Well,
in New York.
At that year, Bruno Walter was the top conductor. It was the second season of a 2-year music advisor post. He was the chief conductor. the guests were pretty good the year I came in. Also, they had some Munch and Bernstein, and great people. So anyway, uh, he he was the conductor of record, and I remember going to Carnegie Hall because I didn't even know what was going on. I mean, and of course, they could ask you to play anything, in a way. So I came with a couple of excerpts prepared, uh, and a solo piece if needed. And it was in the green room at Carnegie Hall, and there was a committee there. I recognized a couple of players on the committee, but a lot of the others I didn't know, and various instruments, principal players. They were all principal players, and I played what I had prepared, the passages that I had prepared, hoping I was, everything would come out okay, and which I did. I had them memorized, so I just, played them. But orchestral stuff has to be practiced. Mm-hmm. So anyway, Bruno Walter then says, "You know Don Giovanni?" I said, I could have said not personally, but no, I didn't say that. I didn't say anything. I said, well, so he sat down at the piano. I said, I've never played at opera. And he says, how about Tannhäuser Overture? I said, yes. So he started playing the Tannhäuser Overture. And there's a couple of clarinet solos in that overture in the middle, middle of the overture. And I played those. And then he asked me about a couple of other pieces, classic repertoire. Because you see, for him, I had prepared, for the audition, I had prepared the flashy stuff, the Galanta dances and the Scheherazade and all of the so-called hard stuff of the time, or the flashy stuff of the time, because you had to show that you had facility, but you never knew what they were going to ask you after that. So I played quite a long time in that audition, and I heard him say to the manager, personnel manager, he said he'll be a valuable member of this. I overheard that, and sure enough, I got a letter from the managing director in a few days. I was in Buffalo, of course. Still, I had to finish the season, and my sister had to sign the contract. There was no email or any of this kind of stuff in those days. Everything had to go through the U.S. Post Office, and sent it back in, and that's how it started.
Stanley, what year was that?
I came in the season 1948-49.
Wow.
The seasons were always part of 2 years.
Wow.
And it was the second year of Bruno Walter's chief conducting post. And we were a new section, except for the bass clarinet. The bass clarinet had been there 2 years already from the Chicago Symphony. Leonard Schaller, a very old timer. He wasn't old then, but he was a very good player and played the German system. He played he played the Erle clarinet, bass clarinet.
I just have a question, because when you're using the words old timer, I'm extremely fascinated. So this is the late 40s. Okay, you're
right.
How old? 20? 19 at this point?
I was 19 when I came in.
Okay, so you're 19. So I can't, the whole week before this interview, I keep on thinking, who was 65 when Stanley was there? So I'm asking you, Mahler was in the New York Philharmonic as the music director until 1911.
Right.
Were there people in the orchestra that had played under Mahler as the music director?
There were. I think in my first year there were two players. I think that gave an interview for a Mahler boxed set where they spoke about Mahler. I don't know how much they remembered or what, but but he was there, yes. And it was, I'd say they had an illustrious list of conductors. There's no question about that. And so anyway, it was a 28-week season, and there was 6 weeks in the summer at Lewiston Stadium, which was a summer venue, outdoor venue, which was an interesting place. It was run by a lady who was on the board of directors, Mrs. Guggenheim, and it was a different. They were a different program every night.
Wow.
6 nights a week, a rehearsal in the morning, concert at night, different program. Wow. And the conducting roster was great. I mean, we had, and the soloist roster, Heifetz played, Rubinstein played, you know, the big names played.
And some of the conductors included who?
The conductor, Reiner. I played with Reiner in the Lewiston Stadium, and many concerts with Pierre Monteux.
Yeah.
And it was a cross section of people that conducted.
Great.
And they had, you know, some lighter nights with Romberg and people like that, you know. They had a Viennese night and a Gershwin night. Levant played with us, the Concerto and the Rhapsody in Blue. Anyway, that was the way the season evolved at that time, was 28 weeks plus the 6 weeks. It was not year-round like it is now, or most orchestras are year-round.
So how long was Bruno Walter there with you?
Well, with the title, 2 seasons.
Oh, okay.
No, I was with him 1 season.
Oh, okay.
He was in his 2nd season of a 2-year appointment. But, of course, he came back as a guest. I recorded the Song of the Earth, and 2 Mahler symphonies with him. Those recordings are done in Carnegie Hall, on the actual stage, Carnegie Hall. Late at night, they recorded late at night because they didn't want the subway rolling by too often.
So who replaced Walter then?
It was for 1 season, Metropolis and Stokowski, co-directors for 1 season.
Huh.
After that, Metropolis alone for 9 more years.
You've always spoken very highly about Metropolis.
Metropolis, a wonderful musician, wonderful man. I mean, a humanitarian, helped people. He helped people study, get instruments. You know, he helped. He was a father figure for many, and very special person. Lived modestly, and but it was great. You know, he conducted with his hands, and people couldn't figure out what he's doing. You know, it looked like he would. You know, it's like this kind of business. You know, but he tried a baton at one time, but it wasn't him. But the most difficult works we did with him, and he you know, he made a landmark recording of Wozzeck of Berg. You know, that he did. We did it in 5 rehearsals, and that recording is still around. By the way, it's a classic. And he didn't even use the score after the first couple of rehearsals. He had the whole score memorized, including the rehearsal numbers and letters.
Whoa.
Yeah. But I remember somebody asked him a question near 986 page, you know, measure. What is my second note? Somebody, you know, he scratched his head. You know, he came up with the right answer. Yeah, I never saw memory. That was for memory. There was nothing like that.
Wow.
Everything was from memory. Everything.
Wow. So how long was he with the orchestra?
I believe it was 9 years.
Okay. So next
9 seasons.
Next music director.
The next one after him was Lenny, wasn't.
Okay, what year was that? What year was that?
He was a guest before that, mind you. I'm talking about he was a guest in the 40s, and
Yeah.
but he became music director in 1958.
People say he got his big break stepping in as the assistant conductor. Were you in that concert?
No, I was too young to be in that concert.
Oh, what was I thinking?
That was 1943.
Oh, okay. You only got in a few years later at 19.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was 5 years later. It makes a big difference in a child. I was 19. What would I have been in 5 years? You remove 5 years,
That's true.
No, I was good, but I don't think I was that good.
Well, I want to, now that we're talking about Bernstein, I'm going to read something that's going to make me incredibly unpopular with the entire clarinet community, which is okay. I'm used to that. I had the opportunity to meet Leonard Bernstein's daughter, Nina, exactly 2 years ago. And I read her the letter, and she was completely shocked. And she just didn't know what to say about it. But I know that you were very close with him. And as you said, you've done the Copland Concerto with him numerous times. In fact, you have a recording. It was nominated for a Grammy. I think it was his last recording.
His last recording. In my career, I was his first, I was soloist when I became principal in 1961 of the Debussy Rhapsody. And then in 77, the live performance that was recorded of the Corigliano Concerto. That's 3 years prior to the studio recording with Zubin, and then the Nielsen Concerto in the 70s, late 70s, and then the Copland was his last time.
And of course, John Corigliano always says the best recording was the Bernstein on the radio live.
That was a live. Well, that's available on a box set of the historic broadcasts, going back, to the beginnings of recording, and that I was very proud to be on that particular set because it was. The other people on it were really great legends, great violinists, pianists, singers.
Sure. So I want to read the letter because we all know that he was a student of Copland, a champion of Copland, and a fan of the Clarinet Concerto. This was a letter. There's a book of Bernstein's letters, and this is addressed to Aaron Copland. It has a few greetings, and finally he says, also, we bought a phonograph, and there in the same shop was the Clarinet Concerto and the quartet, on both of which I'm therefore now an expert. I am disappointed in the concerto, and I think it may be a little on account of the performance. I remember as being so much fun when you struggled with it on the piano, parentheses, of course, everything is more fun when you do it on the piano with your apologetic grin, close parentheses. And Benny Goodman's performance is ghastly and student-like, I think. But there is also something that does not quite satisfy about the score, despite its evident beauties. The opening is still ravishing, and I find to my dismay that it is in places less like Satie than like the Rosenkavalier Trio. Tant mieux, say I. Though surprised not a little. Strange, in fact, how many touches of Strauss there are. There's even a slight Don Quixote feeling here and there. I still disapprove of the cadenza, finding it cute but arbitrary. But it is the last part that disappoints me because the last part was so much fun. Of all things, the form doesn't seem to work. So I read this to Nina, and her jaw fell. She goes, I've never heard anything about this. We grew up listening to this recording with Benny Goodman and so forth. The whole family was a big fan of the piece and the performance. But this is a documented letter, and I just thought if anyone would know anything about it, maybe you do.
Well, that's the first I know of the letter, and I've read various critiques of the concerto over the years. I think Benny Goodman deserves a lot of credit for, first of all, for getting it composed, you know, commissioning Copeland. And I felt that Benny Goodman was an incredibly talented man. There's no question about it. There's a natural talent. Of course, his focus was in the pop world. It was not in orchestral playing. You know, people you have to realize that he was. Today they call it crossover, I guess, right? That's the modern term. But he deserves credit for these various things. I'll say the contrast, for instance, that he commissioned, you know, with Bartok, the Mio Concerto, you know, a bunch of these pieces are really just amazing. The playing of some of these works, the first performances of these works, of course, there was nothing to compare it to, you know. Don't forget, Goodman definitely was a very talented clarinet player. There's no question about it. You know, it's how you see a player like that. You know, he's broad. There's a vision in his playing. He's not locked into 4 measures. That's another point with preparing for orchestral playing, orchestral auditions, where you see the 4-bar phrase that you play, a solo phrase, and you play, and I've heard it played that as if it started with that 4 bars and ended with it. It was just lopped out. It didn't have any meaning to what went before or after or during. And you hear people play in a you know, in a monochromatic you know, way of everything is at the same level. There's no rising and falling. There's no articulation. I heard, I don't know how many recordings of the Mozart Concerto. Well, you know, Mozart in those days, they didn't put in every slur, and you hear no articulation. You don't hear beginnings and ends. It's just you know, smooth. That's what I always think. Smooth is a good term. I like that. Red Skelton, he used that when he played the drunk, you know, in those scenes. He said, "Smooth." But everybody has the power or the joy to put something of yourself in there, you know. But you have to know what's going on. There's no right and wrong tempo, so it's a little faster, a little slower. But you have to know what's going on, above it, below it, and on both sides. You hear most auditions where you hear the phrase played as if there's nothing else going on before or after or during. It's in context, and I'd recommend anybody to be careful with articulation. Articulation is very important.
Great, thank you for that. And what I wanted to say is, the students that I've talked to of yours, right? Just in connection with what you're saying, instead of just studying the excerpts, you would know, actually, having done the job longer than anyone ever, you know, little things to worry about. So instead of a Scheherazade cadenza, for example, you'd point to a Rachmaninoff piano concerto or something and just say, play this, da, 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 because that's the hard part, you know, getting that all together with your colleagues, with good articulation, in piano, in perfect rhythm, everything speaking, not too loud. That's the difficulty of doing the job, really.
Oh, absolutely. It's amazing what can be considered difficult. you look at the Beethoven Fifth Symphony and the third movement, toward the end of the third movement, the four notes. Da, da, da,
No.
da. It's pianissimo. Da, 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 da. And you haven't played many measures till when that comes, and you look at the four A's, and is it going to come out or isn't it? Not. But mostly you hear it maybe louder, and it's just a, it's a certain kind of shortness you want. Da, 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 da.
Mm.
But that's hard.
Yeah, I know.
It's million notes in another piece. It's difficult to do, but it's not the same.
Well, so let's go back. Now Bernstein entered your life. 1961, very important music director for you.
Yeah. Well, for one thing, I got to play a lot of chamber music also during those years. They formed a chamber ensemble at the Philharmonic. We played a whole series up at the 92nd Street Y in New York, and you got to really learn. You learned your craft in a way. You learned how to walk out on a stage, how to bow, how to walk off. You learned how to play for the public, which you have to learn. Most people don't know it. It's not something they study. And the amount of music you can play that's written for small combinations. I remember I did the Ralph Shapey. He called it a concerto. It was for not too many, just a few instruments, and it was one of those impossible things. I remember playing that on the chamber concert series, and you get to play different combinations. So that's also a very valuable thing to do, and we had that for all those years. But we had more or less what the world said was the best all those years. It was very fortunate, New York being what New York is. It got the best people for everything.
So, but when did you become principal clarinet? How did that happen?
Well, it happened in 1960. In 1960, the McGuinness, the principal, Rob McGuinness, was an excellent orchestral clarinetist. He was in one of the early classes at Curtis when they opened the doors. Bonnard was the teacher, and he went into the Philadelphia Orchestra. McGuinness did as the assistant to Bonnard, and I think a year or so after he became principal. And then he went into the Navy band during the war. He was in Washington as a concert, leader, the first chair player of the Navy band. Anyway, the McGuinness had played already in Philadelphia, Cleveland, NBC, the Philharmonic, maybe at the Met for a short time. He had played in a number of places. He moved about, it seemed. Maybe that was the way it was with the people in my prior generation to me, where they did a lot of moving around. That's why they thought they were wanderers or something, So anyway, there was a new music school opened up in Indiana, a very famous school, and they were going all over the country picking faculty, and because they were paying big bucks, and he went out there to Indiana to teach at that school. I think he left after a while and then came back again, to that school. I think he did 2 stints there. I didn't follow that completely, but so when he left, Bernstein through management asked me if I would be interested in becoming the principal player. Well, I didn't have to think very long, because don't forget, I was just focused. I didn't do too much thinking, you know. But I that's when it started. That was the first start for that part of my career.
1960.
1960.
So this is the 60th anniversary of when you were appointed to principal clarinet.
It is. Oh, you're right.
Yeah. So I just forgot what I wanted to say. Okay, so it was. Oh, how old were you then? I should be able to. 31.
Well, look, I was born in 29. I guess I was 31, right?
32. Depends on what you month. Yeah.
February.
Right. So you started in that September after that, or
I started in the fall. Yes, in the fall.
Wonderful. And so, how many years with Bernstein?
Well, Bernstein, he was there from 58 to 69. But don't forget, he was a frequent guest on both ends of that tenure. We did the young people's concerts with him, you know, all 54 of them over the years. We went from black and white to color with those concerts. And they were quite something, because the script kept getting revised up to 5 minutes before the downbeat came. And they were amazing, those young people's concerts. But anyway, he came back after. We recorded a Mahler cycle in the 60s when he was music director, and did one in the 80s also, you know, where he rethought the pieces. So we got to really we did you know, they did whole groups of pieces. Like, they wouldn't do just one Nielsen symphony. They did all of them, all the Schumann symphonies, all the Brahms symphonies. They didn't do just one or two.
How different was the interpretation in the 60s versus the 80s as a player?
There were differences. I think maybe the 80s were some of the things were more expansive.
What I mean, it's almost a crazy question when you go back, and you've already addressed some of it, but I can't imagine the evolution of what your job was in the 1940s versus when you left. So already by Bernstein, I mean, like, as you said, you've already moved concert halls. Your season's completely bigger. You've gone from, you're now doing famous schools concerts, and they're going from black and white to color. And what I'm actually more interested in a way, what was the atmosphere as a player, besides the contract and everything? What was it like going in and playing in the 40s in the New York Philharmonic, or in the 50s, versus the last 10 years that you were in there? I mean, how was that?
Well, I would say there's a certain continuity to orchestras, you know. They were, of course, when I started, it was all men, and it was all Europeans. And from every school of playing, you can imagine. Every country was represented, you know. We even had somebody from Scotland, viola player, and oh yes, he hit a real burr also. So you know, it was a club, like a club. We had a club room in Carnegie Hall, because it was Carnegie Hall up until they opened the doors of Philharmonic Hall at Lincoln Center in the 61, I guess it was, or 61 or 2. And there was constant chess games going on. One man even wore spats. I remember, you know, spats. That spats are something you wore over your socks. They were gray, like bankers would wear them, you know. and very formally attired, you know, uh, and everything was a suit and tie in those days, even if it was a shabby suit and tie, you know.
You always wore a suit and tie to rehearsal.
Yes, absolutely. It's not like that changed. The dress code totally changed. But anyway, it was like there were a little bit of cliques. There was the Italian clique and the German clique and the Jewish clique. You know, there were clusters. You know, and the the I would say the schools of playing were varied, very varied. The the horn section, they played well, two of them played a particular make of horn. The others, each one played a different make. One played that what they call the big sound horn, and the other one played the more focused, the Alexander, you know, horn. You know, anyway, it was a trumpets. Almost everything were played on the B flat trumpet. You know, today they're using every size of trumpet. You know, but then it was. I didn't play with Harry Glantz, who was the predecessor to Vacchiano, who was his assistant, and he played everything on the B flat trumpet, no matter what it was. Could have been stratosphere writing. So I mean, there was a camaraderie because we did a lot of touring, you know, major tourings. That was the benefit of that job was, you know, some years there were more than one tour. One tour was by ship. We went on the old Queen Elizabeth, and I came back on the Queen Mary after the tour. It was the Edinburgh Festival.
Europe.
Yeah, we went to that by ship. It was in the 50s, 1951, I think, and we went to the Edinburgh Festival. It was to be 14 concerts in 16 days, with Bruno Walter doing 4 concerts, and Metropolis doing all the others. And we played in the historic hall in Edinburgh, the Usher Hall, beautiful hall, and it was the second year of the Edinburgh Festival. So that would end the season. The season ended. It wasn't year round then, and they gave us choice of going back immediately, 2 weeks later or 4 weeks later. So most people took the ticket to go back later. I did also. We went with musicians. We got on the boat train. Then there was no channel. You know, you had to take the ferry across from England to France. So you go to France. You go to France, and I visited Buffet. At that time, they had a store, sort of a woodsy, dark store, in an arcade. And it was. I went in there. I met the guy that. I was at 21 years old. Don't forget. And I went to Van Doren, where I was introduced to Robert Van Doren, the father of Bernard, you know, and who was a clarinet player. He had gone to the conservatoire with at the time of Duquesne. He was a good friend of Gus Duquesne, Augustine Duquesne, who had been principal in NBC for a while in New York with Toscanini. In fact, you can see him on a video. I think there was a Forza del Destino overture.
Really?
And I came back on the Queen Mary with.
Wait, before you go on, I just remembered another Drucker story that I wanted to verify. I heard when you went to the Van Doren factory, you walked in there and they made a big deal. You say, okay, I want to meet the guy that puts the one good reed in a box.
It was basically that. It really was, because it was fun. And in those days, they manufactured in that location, that historic location on the Rue Le Pic, next door to Van Gogh's studio. Oh. And it's a historic building. And then in those days, they were still doing manufacture. They were splitting the tubes, you know, and and things like that. And you could try all the reeds you wanted. They give you a box with a million reeds in it, and then you picked out your 50 or 100 reeds. They would stamp them and pack them for you. Every reed played in Paris until I got back to New York. Then I don't think one played well. So anyway, it was you know, an interesting to be there at that time.
How long was the boat ride back in those days from Europe?
It was about 5 days, 5.5 days.
Great.
Because they could have gone faster, you know, but they don't push the ship. They push the ship at night when people are sleeping. They up the speed, but they don't do it during the day or during meal times. Oh, they were luxury. They were luxury ships, you know. Of course, we weren't. We were traveling in third class, but in fact, on the way over, I was in a cabin with 3 other musicians the size of a telephone booth, and it was below the waterline, so there was no window. You couldn't, even if there was a porthole, you couldn't open it. You'd flood the boat. So that was it was kind of roughing it. But on the way back on the Queen Mary, I was, you know, above the waterline, and only one other musician in it, a violinist, who he was seasick the whole 5 days. He never left the cabin. He was just in bed, green.
So, okay, so let's move on from Bernstein. Who was your music director after that?
Well, there was a short. I think there was chronology. I've got a good memory, but the chronology sometimes there was a season or 2 seasons. The stewardship with George Sell. He not music director, but he was chief, or what they call music advisor. And then came Boulez, Pierre Boulez, who was a great innovator, magnificent musician. You know, he founded that ERCOM, you know, in Paris, the chamber ensemble, you know, that he wrote domains for. And he was great. He changed a lot of things. Are we coming through?
No, yeah, you're coming through. We're just checking. And yes, Boulez was right after Bernstein. We were just checking on the internet.
Yes. And he was, you know, he changed things. He brought an informality to programs. Plus, he did works that we never played before because they weren't in the repertoire of a symphony orchestra. Difficult works. The most difficult works he conducted with such ease. He did the hard passages were just he conducted as well as the easy passages. You could rely on it. It was. And the classics he did, he was trained in all kinds of music. He was not just a modernist. He was a complete musician. I even did the Mozart Concerto opening one of the seasons with him.
Huh. Stanley, was there ever, did you ever participate in a world premiere of a, let's start with an orchestral piece that is literally standard repertoire today?
Well, the 10th Symphony of Shostakovich.
Yeah, you did the world premiere of that.
Sure. The violin concerto of Shostakovich also.
You did the world premiere of that too?
Sure. That was Oistrakh. It was written for Oistrakh. And that was Metropolis for the 10th Symphony also. That's a great recording, that 10th Symphony. We went to Europe featuring that piece in 1955. The tour of 55 was mainland Europe with Metropolis, and we played a lot of the capitals and other cities. We played in Berlin. And there was no concert hall. It was destroyed during the war. This is 1955. We played in the movie theater. The Netanya Palast was the name of the movie theater. It was where the Berlin Philharmonic played. there was no hall, you know. And in fact, the rubble was everywhere. We were in Warsaw, the rubble was everywhere. It's as if the war had just ended at that point. And, uh, you know, it was a, you know, to get to mainland Europe at that year, it was crazy. It was, and that was Metropolis tour. And that 10th Symphony was featured prominently.
Wow. Yeah, but which part did you play? This was pre.
I played the E flat clarinet. But this is in 1955.
Of course, yeah. Wow.
I still had another 5 years to apprentice.
Right. Wow.
You know, I don't forget I played the assistant in E flat clarinet for 12 years.
Yes,
12
right. Which is not, you know, not a very famous fact, but
well,
I mean,
I got to play a lot of the main repertoire because they did a lot of the assistant players got to play a lot of half concerts, and so you got to play a lot of it. And I was always involved with the smaller ensembles also, which was not everybody's cup of tea because some of the old time players on strings and other instruments, they were only orchestra players. They didn't want to play quartets and sextets. They just, you know, it was different. You
know. Was there? I mean, with your amazing amount of experience in all the major repertoire and all the major artists that you played with, looking back, was there ever an important piece for orchestra that you just never got to play that you always wanted to play?
Well, that would be, I'd have to do a little digging on that one. I got to play a lot of pieces I never heard of. I remember one of them. Carl Böhm was a guest conductor. He was a German conductor, and before he came, Mike Bergio from the section, he says, you better look at that piece. It was a suite from an opera, a modern opera by Gottfried von Einem, The Death of Danton's Tod. He says, you better look at that piece. So I looked at it. It was like a roller coaster, you know. And I know they had problems in Vienna, you know, a lot of rehearsals for that. But and Böhm was what you call a no nonsense guy. He always looked like he was in a submarine with the up periscope. Looked like a U-boat commander. And this piece was wild. I tell you, I thought what it looked like on the pages, bloodstains.
Wait, sorry, did you mention the composer? I can't remember.
Gottfried von Einem.
Okay.
It was the name of the piece was the big work was Danton's Tod, the death of Danton.
Wow. Did you?
In the opera, I think.
Is there a concerto? Is there a concerto you've always wanted to play that you never got to play?
Well, I did a Weber concerto with Mazel with Lauren Mazel conducting. I did the first concerto, the F minor.
No, I know you. I know you've done. I know you've done a lot of concertos. I'm just wondering, is there a piece that you wanted to do but you never had the chance to play?
Well, I did all the biggies at the time. You know, you see, they fit it. You see, picking repertoire. A lot of people think, oh, this, you know, yes, maybe Heifetz picked his piece. You know, clarinet player is not going to pick his piece unless something was written for him. Like Corigliano wrote a concerto for me. I'm in the dedication with Lenny. It says to Lenny and Stanley, or Stanley and Lenny, or whatever it is on the front page of it. Oh, you have it. You
signed it for me. That's your signature, and it says for Lenny and Stanley on the top.
No, you see,
it's not my stand, right?
So you know, if it fits into a programming pattern, sometimes when they won a certain piece. And I was a soloist almost every season, not every season, but almost. And I got to play different concertos with different conductors, a lot of guest conductors also, where I got to play them. So it was just terrific, because it's a different kind of mindset when you have to get up in the front 4 times in a week.
Yeah.
And you know, when the downbeat comes, you off you go. You know, it's. I played an interesting concerto by Thea Musgrave.
Mm-hmm.
It was a concerto that where there was a little bit of strolling. I moved to different points, and it was a very excellent piece. She was a good composer, Thea Musgrave, and so that was an unusual piece to play, and I also played with the Juilliard Orchestra. I played Stanislav Skrovatchevsky's concerto.
I was there. It was amazing. It was amazing.
Really, that was.
It was great performance. Yeah.
Even Skrovatchevsky was happy.
Yeah. 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 No, that was a really impressive piece, and a really
the A clarinet. That piece is for the A clarinet.
Wow.
Not that it matters. I mean.
What I'd like to know. Well, well, I mean, we've been mentioning all the great music directors, and you've flipped in all kinds of.
Well, we had. Don't forget, after Boulez, we had Zubin, and we had who was certainly an innovative guy. You know, he was a man of today. You know, he was modern, and he was a great accompanist for soloists. Terrific accompanist. You know, I played with, speaking of a company, I did the domains, you know, of Boulez with the Brooklyn Philharmonic, and Boulez conducted it. Lucas Foss was supposed to conduct it, but he came back too late from a tour he was on, and didn't have time to study, and so at the last minute, from the dress rehearsal, which Boulez and I came by car from Lincoln Center over to Brooklyn to the Academy of Music, and that's where he was asked, you know, to conduct. He said he'd conduct his own piece, and he conducted it, the domains, which was a jump in for a conductor. Except there's not much conducting in that piece. It's mostly it's groups, and it's like little ensembles, and certainly the part of the clarinet is playing alone all the time. It just has to play those little tricks of, you know, a few bad harmonics and a growling and sputtering, and you know this. Anyway,
and then who? Mazur? Was it Kurt Mazur after that?
Came after Zubin. He was there 12 years, and he came with his own likes, which were the classics and the great choral works, B minor Mass, you know, Verdi Requiem. He did mostly in the classic. He didn't. He tried to conduct other things. He had to once in a while, but he was happiest in the classic. Mm-hmm. And then after him came Loren Mazel, who was a terrific violinist. I did l'Histoire de Soldat with him as a guest conductor, where he played the violin.
Really?
Yeah, and conducted with his bow for the instruments of the, you know, the small group for the.
Wow.
Oh, he was a terrific fiddler, and so that was basically my whole group of 10. You know, I mentioned Barbaroli, who had been a music director before my time.
Wow. Did you? I mean, with all the, I can't. I'm literally overwhelmed by some of the names that you've mentioned, and I know it covers like a very small percentage of your
Oh,
career.
absolutely. And soloists too. Great
Well,
solo.
so I just want to ask you. I mean, I almost hate to ask this, but I can't resist. I'm of 60 years of playing principal clarinet with New York Philharmonic, and also years in other orchestras. All the top conductors, all the top guest conductors, soloists. You mentioned already Rubinstein and Heifetz and Oistrakh and whatnot. Are there two or three artists that just absolutely just stick out in your mind, conductors, soloists, whatever, just that just moved you uncontrollably or change your, I mean, really just an amazing experience working with them or hearing them?
Well, the great name is violinist, pianist. You know, I mean, that's obvious. Certain times, certain pieces came up with somebody that were marvelous. You know, the conductors, they all. You see, everybody came to that podium. They came to that podium with the works that they wanted to play, that they liked. You know, it had the certain pieces they had to play because it's a repertoire, a cycle for a repertoire. You have to play Tchaikovsky Fourth Symphony or something. But they came with the pieces they loved and wanted to conduct. So that those moments were terrific. You know, as far as the soloists, they did a cycle of some composer. Maybe that soloist would play a concerto of that composer. I think I've had a lot of excitement over the years, those years, with playing, you know, some of these new pieces like the Corigliano and the domains, and you know, you get to you get, if you're lucky, you get to experience that feeling. And a lot of these pieces were new to me. You know, they were not never performed. And for instance, with that Corigliano concerto, there was no piano reduction. So how do you practice it? There's no piano reduction. There's a score. So you have that. You have and you have a situation where you're playing everything out of context. You can't. Preparing it's different with the piano. If you have a real piano reduction, where you get a little bit of the flavor, but it's always looking and trying. The performing is performing. You certainly find out if you got good nerves or not. Walking out and playing the opening of that Corigliano concerto, coming out of the ether with all those notes, you know that definitely at that point, at least, you had a strong heart. Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting. It's you always have to be. For me, it was always to give it my all, to be focused, to be, you know, think about it as a total picture, and learn what you had to play. Too many people practice what they don't have to play. Practice what you're going to be playing.
Wow. It sounds like that was very memorable. The Corigliano, of all the amazing things you've done, that was one of the really standouts.
You know, the Nielsen concerto was also exciting. You know, it was a situation. You know, it was pretty new. Well, not as a new piece, but it hadn't been recorded that much. You know, there was a Danish recording, I believe, but I had a recording that Cahuzac made. Yeah. And it was on a 10-inch LP, I remember it. Yeah. And I was very impressed with that recording.
And he wasn't a young man when he recorded that, I don't think.
No, he was in his 70s.
Yeah. Well, you know, that I'm so glad we're getting almost a little bit more philosophical about playing. You're talking about the Nielsen, and everybody knows that was done in one take. I think one of the orchestral passages was redone. But you know, I remember I remember when the first time I came to Asia was with the Juilliard Orchestra, and they brought Julius Baker, one of your colleagues, a legendary flute player, to give master classes amongst a few other people. And you know, so once in a while I had it. I mean, this is, you know, whatever, 30 plus years ago, I'd have a chance to talk to him, and he said once in a while he'd have competitions with you. Who's going to drop a note first? He said that he never won. You know, and you hear about the Nielsen, and you know, for I'm just wondering what I can't even imagine. I mean, have you ever made a mistake?
Well, the object is to try not to, but you know.
That's what I want to ask you. Is it the philosophy of I'm just throwing myself in the music and I've got the right mindset and it just happens, or are you actually really focused? I'm not, you know, I'm not going to do that.
You know, when you start, that's when you have to, that's when you go. You can't say, oh, I have to watch what's coming up in 3 measures or something. It's total. You become the vehicle. But look, you have to really get the piece in your head. You know, it's not just reading. You know, it's not just reading it. You have to really experience the piece. It's not easy, especially you're on a major stage, a large stage, and there's no stopping and starting. You just once you release the emergency brake, you go. And I'd say it was certainly great playing with Zubin and with Lenny and with others, but it was I feel very lucky and happy that I've got this in my memory bank. It was a long run. I started young enough, and which is helps.
Keep on downplaying that you're playing Copland Concerto at 80 years old 5 nights in a row. That had something to do with the
well, yeah. You know, when you're in that groove, you know, if you stay in that groove, it's very different once you stop. I wonder what's going to happen when the music comes back. You know, in the U.S. and everywhere else, it's going to take a little time.
Yeah.
It's not going to come back as the same way. You know, it's not easy.
Well, you know, so when I was just starting out, I mean, you know, as a young kid, growing up in New York, of course, it was in your DNA. You bought a clarinet, and someone said, now your idol has to be Stanley Drucker, or we won't sell it to you. You know, so people were telling me that you were called. Your nickname was Superboy. Okay, you're winning all these jobs in Indianapolis and Buffalo, New York.
Everybody took auditions in my early years, in my teenage years. Everybody, you constantly took auditions.
Yeah, but not everyone won them all.
You took an audition to get into Curtis. You took an audition for every place.
Sure, but do you have any kryptonite? Is there an aspect of your playing or a piece that will come up and you say, you know, that one gets me nervous, or you know, when you see a program, you say, you know, nuts. That's going to be a tough season.
You know, early on, it'd probably some of the technical ones. Today, I'd say the Mozart Concerto.
Yeah, sure.
You know, it's a different. First of all, you're playing on the A clarinet, like you are on the Nielsen. They're for A clarinet, which is an added situation because of the weight of the instrument. Nobody used neck straps in those days.
Right.
Yes, if you played in a band, marching. You know, if you were playing one of those festival bands, you know, in New York, but nobody used those kind of aids. They didn't have fancy thumb rests that move. They just, and I tell you something, I think where they put the thumb rest on those earlier clarinets were great, the right place.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I find that the instruments are better in tune today than they were. I know the line of instruments, all of the makers deserve credit for trying and for being involved so fully in trying to do something well. And it's very glad that the old names are still around, and the same thing for the reeds. So we sort of are in partnership in a way with those people. They're our partners, our friends.
I saw an interview with you. I'm not sure that I understood it, but I just want to check it. When back in the day, you would always try to play a different reed every week. Is that right? Even if you do one,
yeah,
you force yourself to get a new one. You just like
well, don't forget it was 4 rehearsals. The standard was 4 rehearsals, 4 concerts.
Right.
So that's a lot of playing.
Yeah.
And then there might have been maybe there was a young people's concert or a recording session.
Right.
Some of those weeks. I remember there was a stretch once in the Bernstein years where it went 7 or 8 weeks without a day off.
Wow.
Because they were recording all the time.
So I mean, because Russianoff always made his students buy 1 box a week and keep them for me. But what I'm saying is, did you, even if your read was pretty good and you finished at the end of the week, you would always try to get another read for the next week?
Well, it degrades a little bit, but you still can use it if in an emergency.
Right, but basically 1 read a week. Actually, for the concerts, after you played a week,
rehearsals and concerts and recording.
Yes, a week. Yep. Wow.
Because especially you couldn't tell much in your own room. You'd have to play on stage to feel how it responds.
Sure.
Today, there's a lot of synthetics being used in reeds. Look, if it works for somebody, it's fine, but I think maybe they're better than they used to be when the original types came out, the synthetics. But I'm a sort of a traditional type of a clarinet player. I don't like the extra keys on a clarinet. I like the standard 17/6, clarinet, and I'm not interested in an extra G sharp key or an extra low E. It's unnecessary. It just adds weight to an instrument.
So one big legacy, in my opinion, that goes right along with your name is the opening of the movie Manhattan by Woody Allen, right? Have you ever met Woody Allen?
Yes, I did meet him. I met him. I met him at the recording. But we met him by accident in London once. Naomi and I were in an Indian restaurant in a sort of a remote district. I think it was Chelsea Harbor district. And in walked Woody Allen and Sun Yi and another couple. Obviously, they looked like Americans. And they sat in the front of this place. We were in the back. There was nobody else in the restaurant. And Naomi says, "You better go over and say hello." I said, I don't want to bother him. Who knows what he's doing. She says, "If you don't say hello today, I'm not going to speak to you." So anyway, so I went over and he stood up and he looked a little alarmed for a minute. Then he said, he knew who I was. He said, he said, what are you doing here? You know, and I told him I was there to play in a concert, a concert of works by a friend of ours. It was English at one of the churches where they have concerts in London. And so it was the other Woody Allen comment was when they asked about something about clarinet and about me, and he said he must practice a lot.
Is he right?
Practice a lot? No, I didn't practice a lot. I practiced enough.
Yeah.
I try to learn what I had to play. I wasn't going to play a page of Krebs studies if I had to play a Martineau piece or something, you know. Huh. I played what I had to play. It's nice to play Krebs, but or Rowe.
But obviously you matured. I mean, having done the job and doing so long and musically.
I don't think any clarinet player is mature.
Well, but do you feel that you actually improved as a clarinet player technically through the years at any point without?
Yes. I think that when you get in a certain groove of rehearsals, concerts, and recordings, you maintain something. It's memory in the fingers, memory here in the lips. It's ongoing. As soon as as soon as it stops, and then it's sporadic work. It's not the same. So, well, it's not supposed to be. You know, we're not. We're not supposed to stay well oiled. You know, once you're out of the major venues, you know, it may be a hobby for some people, but it never was a hobby for me.
So, I mean, I don't know if you've answered the question, but, you know, the legend is that, you know, everything's so easy for you. And like you say, you just practice what's there and you play the notes and you're the first person to play the Grilliano, blah, blah. But I don't want to just believe that. I want to know, are there any sort of what technical advice would you give?
Well, you know, it's a lot of what you think about, you call it nerves or adrenaline or what. It depends who you're playing for and with. You know, that's a big factor. If you're playing with a community orchestra, the pressure isn't so strong. Sure. If you're playing in Carnegie Hall, the pressure is more.
Did you get nervous sometimes?
If I did, it wasn't obvious.
It never
wasn't obvious. Because you know, you can't take time for that. Mm-hmm. You can't take time to be nervous. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're only part of a larger situation. You know, you're only a clarinet player. You know, it's not like you're playing, you know, as a soloist every time. But some people do have serious problems and nerves. But I don't know how one can conquer that. I just don't know.
Mm. And it sort of technically, is there something that you recommend for clarinet, something bread and butter that like gives you a good foundation so that you can attack a job?
Well, you know, there's the usual thirds and scales, you know, and I would say very important to practice articulation, so that you know which are the detached notes. It's not the same. It varies, you know. Even the short notes vary in quality of how you want a short note to sound. The articulation, that's at that end, I would say number one for me, articulation, second, dynamics. A lot of people get to a situation where there's a diminuendo. They disappear. You don't hear anything. That's the softest note has to be heard. The loudest takes care of itself. but those two, articulation and you know,
Projecting in the soft dynamic.
you have to project in the soft dynamic, right? Absolutely. It has to have as much. It has to sound as good as in the so-called quality zone of mezzo forte to forte.
Right. Right. Is you know, we've only been doing this for over 2 hours, and I think we could probably go on another 8 hours, well, I'm probably another 80 hours. Is Naomi there? I see her in the background once in a while.
Yes, yeah.
You want to bring her over and say hello for a second?
I'm going to say hello. There's Andy.
Hello, hello.
Hi, Naomi. Great to see you. We were just saying you were the first of 5 couples to study with Leon Rushinoff and get married. And you haven't had a very short career either as a clarinetist. In fact, I remember the two of you playing. Was it a Kramer concerto at SUNY Purchase like 35 years ago or something like that?
Played that Kramer concerto in Carnegie Hall with Peter Dvorak conducting.
But what was interesting about Purchase though is that I remember Rushinoff brought Carl Leister over, who was in
yes, you're right.
I remember afterwards, yeah. So that was memorable. I was assuming.
We recorded that Kramer concerto. We also recorded the double concerto of Maya Kupferman.
Oh.
And it's with the Czech National Orchestra in Prague, in Dvorak Hall, and it's going to be out on a record. The Legend series, you know.
Yes. Everyone get that? Yeah. And so your recording's coming out soon.
There's a new one, a new 2-disc set. This isn't it. This is the previous two, and on that will be the double concerto of Kupferman, which is a really wild circus-like piece.
Great. But before I forget, I want to introduce you've been working with Lorenzo. He's my techie guy and a wonderful bass player.
Lorenzo.
Yeah. So
nice to see you and hear you.
Yes.
Thank you.
He's been very helpful. Almost always I give shout outs of people that are online and sending love and all this. There's been so many people, ex-colleagues of yours worldwide, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to take them all down and I'm going to email them to you, okay, next week, and all their messages and all the love they sent, how impressed they are with you, thanking me for having the courage to ask you and all these questions and everything.
Oh, it's a great pleasure to talk to you. You and I go back a ways, don't we?
Yes, and like I said, I've forgiven you for not taking me to Juilliard for that first audition.
No, it wasn't my fault. I am innocent.
Stanley, so I mean, like I said, we've had legends on this show, and I've been thrilled to talk to them, and I've asked what I thought were very important questions, like big picture things about advice for young people and clarinet.
Yes.
But in this case, I think that's kid stuff. Am I allowed to say, I think you're 91, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
You're 91, okay?
I think it's I'm happy to be 91.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think half of the audience just fainted, by the way. But anyway, you're 91. There's your lovely bride there. You're still playing, you're kicking out albums. Well, actually, before we do anything, have you ever been stressed out about anything? I mean, you always seem very confident and very collected. And are you the type who ever gets stressed out about things?
Yes, definitely. Think about things deeply.
Okay. Now, we want some life answers because it's very hard to travel right now, and everyone wants to go to India and study with a guru about life lessons. I want you to sum up as concisely as possible what really sticks out. What's the key, right, to a long, healthy, happy life and a long, healthy, happy career. And they don't necessarily have to be intertwined.
I'll tell you what it is. Luck.
Really?
Well, I'm not the first one to say it. Mick Jagger said the same thing.
Okay. Is it Naomi? Is she there? Has she been down?
Yeah.
Am I nervous?
So she get out of my lap.
Okay.
Go ahead. Sit down. No,
This is too much.
yeah, you see yourself.
Yeah.
You
Naomi.
can lower your head a little bit
Mhm.
so that you can smile.
Other than luck, what's the key to a long, happy, healthy life and a long, happy, healthy career? They don't have to be connected, or they could be.
I can tell you that.
No, wait, you already told us. We want to hear from Naomi.
What's the secret to it? To a happy, long.
Long longevity and happiness.
I like him.
Okay, oh, we're talking about the marriage. Yeah, he's not so bad. He's not so bad.
Never come home for lunch.
Okay, listen, do me a favor. No, Naomi, go back. This is the image we all want. We're going to sign off. And this is the last image. Naomi Drucker on the lap of Stanley saying a long, happy life. It's luck. And she likes Stanley. We have that documented for all time. Okay, we're going to sign up. I thank you, everyone, for tuning in. This was just an incredible honor for me. I thank you so much for participating. I think this is so valuable to musicians and people, and certainly clarinetists everywhere. So I can't thank you enough. Naomi, thank you so much for being there, cheering him on through his life, but even at this moment. Don't move. We're going to sign off. This is the image we all want to see. Have a great day, everybody, and have a wonderful day and weekend.
Bye.
Naomi.
Okay.
Okay.